Avery Sinclair stood frozen in the doorway of Ethan's corner office, her hands still gripping the champagne bottle she'd brought to celebrate their venue booking, watching as her fiancé of 7 years pressed his lips against his assistant's neck in a way that made her stomach drop like a stone. The sound of her sharp intake of breath cut through the intimate moment, and Ethan's head snapped up, his face cycling through surprise, guilt, and something that looked almost like relief. Madison, the 25-year-old assistant Avery had personally mentored and recommended for the position, had the decency to at least look mortified as she scrambled to adjust her blouse. Ethan started, but she was already backing away, the champagne bottle slipping from her numb fingers to shatter against the marble floor. 3 weeks later, Avery sat in their shared apartment, now just her apartment, staring at the engagement ring that had cost Ethan 3 months' salary back when he was a junior associate. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd helped him pick out Madison's replacement ring, which was twice the size and half as meaningful. The breakup had been swift and surgical. Ethan, ever the lawyer, had approached it like a business transaction. "We've grown apart," he'd said, as if 7 years could be dissolved with corporate speak. "I need someone who understands my ambitions." The unspoken translation hung between them, someone younger, someone who would orbit around his career without casting her own shadow. What stung most wasn't the betrayal, though, that cut deep, but the dismissal. The way Ethan had cataloged her supposed shortcomings, like evidence in a case file. Too independent, too focused on her own career, too comfortable challenging his decisions, as if these were character flaws rather than the very qualities that had made her fall in love with her own life. Avery had built herself into one of New York's most sought-after PR executives. Through sheer determination and an intuitive understanding of human nature, she could spin a scandal into a success story, transform a villain into a victim, and make the public fall in love with anyone except, apparently, herself. The wedding invitations had already been sent. The dress hung in her closet like a ghost of futures past. But instead of falling apart, Avery did what she did best. She managed the crisis. She called the vendors, returned the gifts, and crafted a perfectly diplomatic explanation for their social circle. She handled her own heartbreak like a PR campaign, controlling the narrative with surgical precision. Her colleagues at Morrison and Associates watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern. She worked later, took on more challenging clients, and threw herself into rebuilding corporate reputations with the fervor of someone reconstructing her own identity. Within 6 months, she'd landed 3 major accounts and earned a reputation as the woman who could save anyone's image as long as it wasn't her own broken heart she was trying to repair. The city that had once felt like home now felt like a stage where she'd been performing a role she'd outgrown. Every restaurant held memories of anniversary dinners. Every street corner echoed with conversations about their future that would never come to pass. But Avery was nothing if not resilient, and she began to see the cracks in her old life not as failures, but as spaces where light could finally get in. She started saying yes to invitations she would have declined, began reading books that had nothing to do with work, and slowly remembered what it felt like to exist outside the carefully constructed narrative of Ethan and Avery. For the first time in years, she could make decisions without consulting someone else's timeline, someone else's ambitions, someone else's vision of who she should be. The irony was that her newfound independence made her better at her job, not worse. Clients trusted her implicitly because she'd learned to trust herself. She could spot authentic emotion because she'd finally allowed herself to feel her own. And when Graham Carlisle's representatives called her office on a rainy Tuesday in October, she was exactly the woman she needed to be to handle what came next. Graham Carlisle's reputation preceded him into Avery's conference room. Like storm clouds gathering on a clear day, the tech mogul sat across from her, his dark hair slightly disheveled and his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it while his legal team outlined the PR disaster that had brought him to New York. The headlines painted him as a reclusive billionaire whose clean energy startup had become embroiled in a patent lawsuit with accusations of corporate espionage and stolen technology dominating the news cycle. But Avery, who'd built her career on reading between the lines, saw something different in Graham's tired eyes, not guilt, but grief. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from fighting battles on multiple fronts while the world watched and judged. "Mr. Carlyle," she said, dismissing his team with a subtle nod, "why don't you tell me what really happened?" He looked surprised by the directness of her question, and for the first time since entering her office, he seemed to truly see her. "You don't want to hear the official statement first? I've read it. It's terrible." Avery leaned back in her chair, studying him with the same intensity she'd once reserved for particularly challenging campaigns. Corporate speak designed to say nothing while sounding important. "If you want me to save your reputation, I need the truth." Graham was quiet for so long that Avery wondered if he'd changed his mind about hiring her. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone unaccustomed to being vulnerable. "My wife died 2 years ago. Cancer. She was the heart of our company, the one who believed in the mission when I was just a programmer with impossible dreams. After she passed, I stopped paying attention to the details, to the people. I let my grief make me careless, and my competitors saw an opportunity. The patent lawsuit," he explained, "was baseless but expensive to fight. The real damage came from a former employee who'd leaked internal emails out of context, making Graham appear callous and profit-driven rather than a man trying to honor his late wife's legacy while drowning in his own pain. I don't care about the money," he continued, and Avery believed him. "But Alana's dream was to make clean energy accessible to everyone. If I lose this company, I lose the last piece of her." Avery felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared loss that had nothing to do with professional sympathy. What was she like? Graham's smile was the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. Brilliant, stubborn, she could make anyone believe in impossible things. He paused, studying Avery's face. "She would have liked you, I think. You have that same quality, making people want to be better than they are." The compliment caught her off guard, delivered without the calculated charm she was used to from clients trying to win her over. Graham spoke like someone who'd learned to waste neither words nor feelings, who'd been forced to distill everything down to what truly mattered. Over the following weeks, Avery threw herself into rebuilding Graham's image with the same intensity she'd once applied to her own healing. She crafted a narrative that was honest without being exploitative, showcasing the man behind the billions without turning his grief into a marketing tool. She arranged carefully selected interviews, orchestrated strategic appearances, and slowly began to shift public perception from corporate villain to widowed visionary. But it was the quiet moments between the public performances that began to matter most. Late nights in conference rooms, reviewing strategy over takeout containers and strong coffee. Graham's dry humor emerging as he became more comfortable, his insights into human nature proving as sharp as his technical brilliance. The way he listened when she spoke, not just waiting for his turn to talk, but actually absorbing what she said and building on it. "You're not what I expected," he told her one evening as they watched the city lights from her office window. "What did you expect? Someone harder, more calculating?" He turned to face her fully. "You care about the truth, not just the narrative. That's rare in your industry. It's rare in yours too," she replied, and felt something electric pass between them that had nothing to do with professional chemistry. The attraction was subtle at first, hidden beneath layers of professional courtesy and mutual respect. But Avery began to notice the way Graham's eyes lingered on her face when she spoke, the careful distance he maintained as if afraid of overstepping boundaries that were already beginning to blur. She found herself looking forward to their meetings in ways that had nothing to do with the campaign's success. By the time Graham's public image had shifted from pariah to pioneer, Avery realized she'd accomplished something more dangerous than salvaging his reputation. She'd allowed him to see past the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her own heart. The first time Graham kissed her, it was in the empty lobby of his hotel at 2 a.m, after they'd spent 6 hours crafting his response to a particularly vicious op-ed. Avery had been arguing passionately about authentic messaging when she noticed he'd stopped listening, his eyes fixed on her lips with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm sorry," he said, stepping closer. "I know this complicates things, but I can't stop thinking about you." The kiss was gentle but certain, his hands cradling her face as if she were something precious he'd finally allowed himself to want. When they broke apart, Avery felt like she was surfacing from deep water, gasping for air she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "This is complicated," she whispered. But she didn't step away. "Everything worthwhile is complicated," Graham replied, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "The question is whether it's worth the risk." They took things slowly, carefully, with the deliberate patience of two people who'd learned that love was too precious to rush. Graham courted her with the same thoughtful intensity he brought to everything else, remembering how she took her coffee, sending her books by authors she'd mentioned in passing, calling just to hear her voice when he was traveling. Their relationship unfolded in quiet moments stolen between the demands of their respective careers. Dinner at hidden restaurants where they could talk without interruption. Long walks through Central Park where Graham would tell her stories about Elena that weren't painful anymore, just bittersweet. Nights in her apartment where they explored each other with the reverence of people who understood that connection was a gift, not a guarantee. Graham was different from Ethan in every way that mattered. Where Ethan had been performative in his affections, Graham was quietly present. He listened not just to respond but to understand, asked questions about her work that showed genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. When she talked about her own dreams, maybe starting her own firm someday, traveling to places that existed purely for their beauty rather than their business potential, he didn't dismiss them as impractical, but instead asked what it would take to make them happen. "You have this way of making people feel seen," he told her one evening as they lay tangled together in her bed, her head on his chest as she traced patterns on his skin. "Not just acknowledged, but truly seen for who they are. Is that what I do to you?" she asked, lifting her head to meet his eyes. "Among other things," he said, his smile soft in the lamplight. "You make me remember what it feels like to want a future again." The intimacy between them grew deeper with each stolen hour. Graham was a generous lover, attentive to her responses, patient in his exploration of what brought her pleasure. He seemed to find joy in her joy, taking his time to worship her body with his hands and mouth until she forgot everything, except the way he made her feel desired, cherished, completely present in her own skin. But it was the emotional intimacy that truly ended her. The way he shared his fears about living up to Elena's memory, his uncertainty about whether he deserved happiness again, how he held her after she told him about the humiliation of finding Ethan with Madison, the months of questioning everything she thought she knew about herself and her worth. "He was an idiot," Graham said simply, his arms tightening around her. "But I'm grateful for idiots who don't know what they have, because sometimes they leave it behind for people who do." They'd been seeing each other for 3 months when Graham asked her to accompany him to a charity gala, their first truly public appearance together. Avery chose a midnight blue dress that made her feel confident without trying too hard. And when Graham saw her, the look in his eyes made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "Are you ready for this?" he asked as their car pulled up to the venue. "Cameras already flashing outside, are you?" she countered, straightening his tie in a gesture that felt both intimate and proprietary. "With you, I'm ready for anything." The gala was a success by every measure that mattered. Graham was charming but authentic, handling reporters' questions with the ease of someone who no longer had anything to hide. Avery stayed by his side, not as arm candy but as a true partner, contributing to conversations and clearly holding her own among New York's elite. They danced together to a jazz quartet, Graham's hand warm on her back as he spun her slowly round the floor. "Thank you," he murmured against her ear. "For what?" "For giving me a reason to want to be better than I was." It was a perfect evening, the kind that would have made for a perfect ending to their story if life were that simple. But as they left the gala, Avery's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "Call me ASAP. We have a problem." The photo had already gone viral by the time they reached her apartment. Avery and Graham on the dance floor, looking at each other with unmistakable intimacy and affection. The caption called her the mystery woman who tamed Tech's most eligible widower, and the comments ranged from admiring to vicious. But it was the call from Ethan that came at midnight that truly changed everything. "I saw the pictures." His voice was tight with something that might have been jealousy or might have been panic. "We need to talk." Ethan looked older when he walked into the coffee shop, his usual confidence replaced by something that resembled desperation. His engagement to Madison had been announced in the society pages just 2 weeks earlier, but the man sitting across from Avery bore little resemblance to the triumphant lawyer who'd upgraded to a younger model. "You look good," he said, and there was genuine surprise in his voice, as if he'd expected to find her diminished by their breakup. "Thank you." Avery kept her tone neutral, professional. She'd agreed to this meeting out of curiosity more than anything else, wanting to understand what had driven him to reach out after months of careful avoidance. "I made a mistake," Ethan said without preamble. "Leaving you, throwing away what we had for." He gestured vaguely, unable or unwilling to name what he'd chosen instead. "How's Madison?" Avery asked, genuinely curious about the woman who'd inadvertently become a catalyst for her own transformation. Ethan's laugh was bitter. "Young, expensive. Exactly what I thought I wanted." He leaned forward, his eyes intense in a way that once would have melted her resolve. "But she's not you, Avery. She doesn't challenge me, doesn't make me think, doesn't even seem to like me when I'm not buying her things. And that's my problem. How I know about Carlisle," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I know you're only with him to prove a point, to show me what I lost. But you don't have to do this anymore. Avery, you've made your point. I get it." The accusation hung between them like a slap, and Avery felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. "You think I'm dating Graham to make you jealous, aren't you?" Ethan's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd built his career on reading people's motivations. "Come on, Avery, a billionaire tech mogul. It's a little convenient, don't you think?" "What's convenient?" Avery said, her voice deadly quiet. "Is that you've convinced yourself that everything I do is somehow about you. That I couldn't possibly have moved on, built a life, found someone who actually values what you saw as flaws." But Ethan wasn't finished. Over the following days, he launched what could only be described as a campaign to win her back, sending flowers to her office, showing up at restaurants where he knew she'd be having business dinners, even calling her mother to express his regrets about their broken engagement. The media, already fascinated by Avery's relationship with Graham, seized on the drama with gleeful abandon. Suddenly, every gossip blog was running stories about the love triangle between the tech mogul, the PR executive, and her lawyer ex-fiancé. Photographers followed her to work, reporters called her friends for quotes, and social media exploded with speculation about whether she was using Graham for revenge or status. The worst part was watching how the scrutiny affected Graham. He'd spent 2 years carefully guarding his privacy, using his wealth and influence to keep his grief away from public consumption. Now, his relationship with Avery had made him front-page news again. But this time the narrative wasn't about his professional achievements or his wife's legacy. It was about whether he was being manipulated by a woman with her own agenda. "Maybe we should take a break," he said one evening after a particularly brutal day of tabloid coverage. They were in his hotel suite, the curtains drawn against the cameras that had been stationed outside. "Since morning, until this dies down, is that what you want?" Avery asked, though she was afraid of the answer. Graham was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. "I want to protect you from this, from what loving me costs." "That's not your choice to make," she said, moving to stand beside him. "I knew what I was signing up for when we started this, did you?" He turned to face her, and she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Because I'm not sure I did." The doubt in his voice broke something inside her chest, but it also crystallized her resolve. She'd spent too many years letting other people define her worth, her motivations, her choices. She wasn't about to let Ethan's desperation and the media's hunger for drama destroy the first real thing she'd found since her old life imploded. "I need to handle this," she told Graham, her PR instincts finally cutting through the emotional chaos. "Publicly, definitively. Avery, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She kissed him softly, trying to pour all her certainty into the contact. "Trust me." The press conference was Avery's idea, held at her firm's offices with Graham noticeably absent. She'd spent her career managing other people's crises, crafting their narratives, protecting their reputations. Now it was time to reclaim her own story. She wore her sharpest suit, the one that made her feel invincible and face the cameras with the poise of someone who'd finally stopped caring what the wrong people thought of her. "I'm here to address the speculation about my personal life," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "For the past several months, various outlets have suggested that my relationship with Graham Carlisle is motivated by revenge, status-seeking, or publicity. I'm here to set the record straight." She paused, letting the room settle into complete silence. "My relationship with Graham is based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. It has nothing to do with my former fiancé's regrets about choices he made freely, and everything to do with two adults who found something worth building together." A reporter called out a question about Ethan's claims, but Avery cut him off with a raised hand. "As for my ex-fiancé's recent attention-seeking behavior, I'll say this once: some people spend their lives looking backward, trying to reclaim things they've lost. Others choose to look forward, building something new and better. I know which kind of person I am, and I know which kind of person Graham is. That's all that matters." She didn't take questions, didn't elaborate, didn't justify or explain beyond what she'd already said. She simply walked away from the podium, leaving behind the noise and speculation and doubt, ready to fight for the love she'd found in the quiet spaces between her old life and her new one. The vineyard in Napa Valley was everything their relationship had been: beautiful, understated, and completely their own. No photographers, no guest list to manage, no timeline, but the one that felt right to them. Just Avery and Graham, standing beneath an arch of wild roses as the sun set over rolling hills that stretched to the horizon. Avery wore a simple ivory dress that moved like water in the evening breeze, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way that felt more like herself than any elaborate style could have. Graham had traded his usual expensive suits for a navy jacket and white shirt, looking relaxed in a way she'd rarely seen during their months in the public eye. "I was terrified you'd change your mind," he admitted as they stood facing each other, hands clasped between them while the officiant waited patiently nearby. "About the elopement or about you?" Avery asked, her smile soft in the golden light. "Both, either. All of it." Graham's thumb traced across her knuckles in a gesture that had become as familiar as breathing. "You could have anyone, Avery. Someone without all the complications I come with." "I don't want anyone," she said simply. "I want you, your complications, your past, your future, all of it." The ceremony was brief and personal, their vows written separately but somehow echoing each other in their honesty. Graham promised to love her boldly, to never make her small, to make himself comfortable, to build a life with her that honored both their dreams and their scars. Avery promised to see him clearly, to choose him daily, to never let fear disguise itself as practical wisdom. When the officiant pronounced them married, Graham kissed her with the kind of joy that made her feel weightless, as if all the gravity that had been holding her down had suddenly shifted to hold her up instead. They'd rented a small cottage on the vineyard grounds for their honeymoon. 3 days of complete privacy where they could be nothing but themselves. No phones, no emails, no outside world intruding on the delicate newness of being husband and wife. "Do you regret it?" Graham asked on their second morning, as they lay tangled together in bed while sunrise painted the walls gold. "Not having the big wedding, the celebration, all the things most women dream about?" Avery considered the question seriously, thinking about the wedding she'd planned with Ethan, the elaborate venue, the designer dress, the guest list that had been more about networking than love. "I had all that once," she said finally. "The performance, the spectacle, the perfect Instagram moments. It was beautiful and completely hollow." She turned to face him fully, her hand tracing the line of his jaw. "This feels real, like we're starting something instead of just putting on a show." Graham caught her hand and pressed it flat against his chest, over his heart. "I love how you see things, how you make me see things differently." They made love slowly that morning, with the unhurried intimacy of people who finally had all the time in the world. Graham worshipped her body with the same careful attention he brought to everything else that mattered to him, until Avery felt herself dissolving into pure sensation, pure connection, pure presence in her own skin. Afterward, they talked about everything and nothing: their plans for expanding Graham's company, Avery's dreams of opening her own firm, places they wanted to travel together, whether they wanted children, how to honor Elena's memory while building their own traditions. "I never thought I'd want this again," Graham admitted as they walked through the vineyard that evening, his arm around her waist as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. "After Elena died, I thought love was something I'd used up, like I only got one chance at it. Maybe we all get as many chances as we're brave enough to take," Avery replied, thinking about her own journey from heartbreak to healing to hope. Maybe the trick is recognizing them when they come. On their last night in Napa, they sat on the cottage's front porch with a bottle of wine from the vineyard where they'd married, making plans that felt both practical and magical. Graham talked about his ideas for expanding clean energy access in developing countries. Avery shared her vision for a PR firm that specialized in authentic storytelling. "For companies doing meaningful work, we could be quite a team," Graham said, his eyes bright with possibility. "We already are," Avery replied, and meant it completely. The drive back to San Francisco felt like returning to the world. But this time, Avery wasn't afraid of the scrutiny or the speculation. She'd found something real, something worth protecting. And she'd learned the difference between hiding from judgment and simply not caring about the opinions of people who didn't matter. Graham had decided to relocate his company's headquarters to New York, wanting to be closer to the policymakers and media that would help him scale his impact. Avery was already fielding calls from potential clients who were intrigued by her combination of strategic thinking and authentic communication. "Are you ready for this?" Graham asked as their plane descended into JFK, the city sprawling beneath them like a circuit board of lights and possibility. "Ready for what?" "The media attention, the challenges of blending our careers, the adventure of building a life together, all of it," he said, taking her hand as the plane touched down. "With you." Avery smiled, thinking about how much had changed since that terrible day when she'd walked into Ethan's office and found her old life ending. "I'm ready for anything." As they walked through the terminal together, Avery realized that her story wasn't about revenge or redemption or even second chances. It was about evolution, about becoming the person she was always meant to be, with someone who saw that person clearly and loved her not despite her complexities, but because of them. A question for you: after following Avery's journey from heartbreak to healing to love, what do you think matters most in building a lasting relationship? The passion of new love, the comfort of shared history, or the courage to keep choosing each other even when the world tries to pull you apart? And in your own life, have you ever had to choose between what looked good on paper and what felt authentic in your heart?